It's day 13 of the trip. We are in Llangors. Are we actually in Llangors?
Or... No, we're in Llanfihangel Talyllyn, which is next door to Llangors. Llanfihangel. Talyllyn. Llyn. Llyn is lake.
Llyn. Hello and welcome to the Extraordinary Ordinary Women podcast, sharing life's adventures. My name is Frankie, and this is a podcast where I interview extraordinary, ordinary women and non-binary folk as part of a 3,000-kilometre cycle around England, Wales and Scotland. Interviewing people older than myself to show that you don't just have to do it whilst you're young. You'll hear all about their adventures and what they get up to, as well as their answers to my big life questions. Like, what does authenticity mean? Did you have a clear sense of direction through life? And what advice would you give to your younger self? Extraordinary people, we have made it to Wales. This is episode 6, where I speak to the incredible storyteller Nikki Jones. She had me completely entranced when I met her and first heard her story, and then again when I came to edit it. This episode was recorded in her conservatory. There's not much background noise, but you can hear her gorgeous dog Apple shuffling on the sofa, sniffing, and generally making dog noises. But every time you hear one, just remember, those dog noises are made with a lot of love. Before the start of this episode, there is a content warning for some potentially triggering content. In this episode, we talk about withdrawal from pain medication, and there is some mention to suicidal thoughts. If you want to avoid this, I'd recommend particularly avoiding 8 minutes to 16 minutes. But if you do find this content triggering, you may wish to skip this episode. So, for people that don't know you at all, could you give me like a snapshot of who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm 48, nearly 49. I used to work in London for the British Horse Racing Board, which the British Horse Racing Authority they are now, as a research executive. So I did a pretty decent job. Ran a small livery yard as well, and played hard and worked very hard. And in 2002, I'd come home back to Wales for Christmas, and I'd suddenly developed trigeminal neuralgia, which is severe facial pain. It's a nerve pain in the face, and it literally happened 1 second. Like I was sitting there watching the Mikado with my gran, and suddenly it was like somebody put a cattle prod to the side of my head. And it knocked me over the pain, and it never went.
Wow.
So that was sort of, after that it was sort of 17 years of operations and pain, ridiculous amounts of drugs that are really, really horrible and tough. And it was tough, which is why I'm back, after a certain sort of 9 months. I had a first operation after about 4 months of it. But I went back to work and they made me redundant, literally pretty much as I walked through the door. No warning, nothing, just bam, go. So I was left in London with no job, pretty unwell, with 2 horses.
Wow.
And rent to pay, so it was a little bit stressful. So I ended up, the pain came back. I walked straight into I just walked into a bookies and got a job there just to, keep the money coming in, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do, and the pain came back very quickly after that, probably from the shock. So I came back to Wales, brought my horses with me, and fell down a very, very deep, dark hole of pain and operations and drugs and stuff. And with life, I just trundled along, and then 2 years ago, I found an app called Curable, which is just a self-management app, really, teaching you how to manage pain in a different way more modern neuroscience, which had moved on. Because the thing is, when you're in pain and you've sort of fallen out of the system, and they just see you once a year and just throw more drugs at you, you don't get told what's out there and what's changed. And so much has changed about pain now. Their knowledge is different. So when I realised that, it really set the foundation for me to sort of basically realise that I couldn't wait for somebody else to cure me. I had to do it myself.
Wow. And so what does that app look like? What do you do?
Oh, it's a fab little app. It's it basically holds your hand. But it's a whole program. It's education, brain retraining. It sort of works on the idea of neuroplasticity. You can sort of train your brain to not be so hyper aware of the pain. Lots of meditation, and visualization, and lots of journaling, a lot of writing. It's very psychologically based, so that's good. And I mean, I'm not one to sort of just stick to one thing, so I dove very deep into the whole pure neuroscience of it all. And there's an Australian neuroscientist called Lorimer Moseley, who is absolutely awesome, and anybody who ever feels pain should watch his YouTube videos, because it's just changed your whole concept of pain and what it is. He's brilliant. And also, for the last sort of 10 years, I've been doing a lot of work with animal behaviourism, training the dogs and the horses in particular with positive reinforcement. So learning a lot about learning theory and about how to use classical conditioning. And so I sort of realised that the pain is actually, in a lot of ways, a lot of it is classically conditioned. It's an expectation, basically. Your brain has made these links. And with trigeminal neuralgia, part of the diagnosis is that it's triggered by random events, that, like a soft touch on your face would usually trigger extraordinary pain. Wind on your face, rain on your face, nothing like that. I spent 17 years covered up completely, so I couldn't go out without multitudes of scarves and masks and stuff and glasses, so nothing touched my, no wind or surprising touched my face. And I deconditioned all of those. And that wasn't through the app, that was just from my own knowledge of how conditioning works and, shaping plans to do, just use graded exposure. So start off small. So, I mean, I reduced my pain by 95%.
Wow.
I completely turned things around completely. It was amazing and very quickly.
And how does that impact your day-to-day life?
Well, it was brilliant because I got a lot of chronic fatigue as well, I'm still on a lot of drugs, but just the whole hole you fall into, and I couldn't drive, so now I can drive again. To do the horses, it would literally be stagger down, throw hay at them, and I do one thing a day. So it would be like if I could go to town for half an hour, that would be it. I would be in bed for the rest of the day. I fluctuate throughout the year, so some years would be better than others and stuff, but at my worst, I was really disabled. And it's hard almost. 2 years sounds like a very short time, but it's a long time in, forgetting how I couldn't shower, cleaning my teeth was, horrendous, talking. I would never have done an interview or something, because talking was so painful. So all those things, it's really, really bizarre. And so I had this sort of miraculous thing. So I started walking. I could barely walk a kilometre, and then again, I treated myself like I was a horse. Been off with an injury and just built it up really slowly. The trouble is, because it was so wonderful, suddenly not being in pain, I didn't need the drugs I was on anymore because I'm not in pain. And it was partly my fault because I was a bit over-enthusiastic, but the NHS basically didn't take any notice and just said, oh yeah, taper off them. And fentanyl.
I don't know what that is.
Fentanyl it's over 20 times more powerful than morphine. I mean, it was in patch form and in a sort of lollipop buccal sort of form. And I tapered it too fast.
Okay.
And dumped myself into withdrawal. And at the same time, my GP decided, because one of the other drugs I'd been on got expensive, he basically bullied me to change to another one, even though I didn't want to. And it was an old-fashioned antidepressant, a tricyclic. Swapped me overnight, lowered the dose. And he knew I was sensitive to them, because I'd had trouble with this drug before. But So I was into dual withdrawal. Anyway, so I had, it happened while my parents were away. Suddenly, life was golden. Things were amazing. I was like, this is just fantastic, And I went, and I just woke up one day and I just felt terrible. Like, it's the weirdest feeling. It was like it felt alien. Like the worst grief, but at the same time you feel nothing. Like, it was like the longer it went on, the more dangerous it felt. It just went on for about 2 weeks, and I was like, what is this? What is this? This is horrendous. And there's nobody here, and I was doing all the right things. I was like, I'm meditating and I'm walking and I'm going outside and I'm doing all these good things to help myself feel better. What's going on? And obviously with my age, with being perimenopausal, and is it that? And I just made one of those weird decisions when I'd been off the buccal fentanyls for a good sort of 4 or 5 weeks at this point, and I was cutting the patch down, so I was on about, the patch was probably about 60 micrograms from down from 75. So I was on quite much lower dose than I had been. Pretty much halved my dose of this drug. And for some reason I took one of the buccal pills one night, just for no reason. It was just, honestly, I was in a state at this point. And I woke up at 3 o'clock feeling normal. And I was like, this is withdrawal. And it just was, and I was Googling away, it was like, what, this is, and I realised that there was such a thing as, prolonged withdrawal from opioids, and that, all this stuff nobody'd ever told me, you shouldn't be tapering off these drugs unsupported, it's really serious. And so I rocked up at the doctor's the next day for an emergency appointment, and the GP said, oh, I don't know, you decide what to do. Which I'm still extremely angry about. All he had to do was ring the pharmacist. That's all he had to do. But they would have hospitalised me at that point. Which, swings and roundabouts might not have been the best thing, so I just don't want this to happen to anybody else. So I went home and reinstated. Not quite onto my highest dose, but onto a much higher dose, at which point, and I'm still on my own, I could have overdosed at that point. Most people would have done. I've got a pretty good tolerance for opioids, thankfully, after being on for so many years. But that's the thing that really upsets me, that a doctor, sitting there telling him I'm suicidal is one thing. That's a choice he made to not do anything about that. That's a judgment call. Maybe I didn't say the right things, and I probably wouldn't have wanted him to do anything anyway. But to let me go home and reinstate onto a very dangerous drug is negligent, in my opinion. And I am talking to the trust about it. It's 2 years ago now, so it's not any kind of formal complaint, just because I didn't have the emotional capacity to do that.
Wow. And so then where are you on that journey now, 2 years later?
2 years later, I'm still have had very patchy support. It took me 9 months to force a pathway to help. They tried to send, my rehab consultant's brilliant, but she's in a different trust, because we don't actually have a hospital in Paris, you see, so everything's very scattered. And she was trying to get me into places in Newport, no go, you have to look in Paris, but there isn't the support in Paris. She was trying palliative care. She was trying everywhere, and you'd get odd bits of advice, but nothing. And all the advice was only other drugs. And at this point, I'm like, I'm not taking another drug. I'm not going to take another drug that is another dependence-forming drug. So I just barreled through it, and it was tough. It was really tough. And I forced a pathway at a local pain clinic, and that actually turned really sour with the psychologist I was seeing. We haven't clicked, but I'm now seeing another one there, so I'm much more hopeful. But lockdown was actually really good for me, because they were very rigid in how I had to taper. So that you must do this, and it just wasn't suiting me, and they wouldn't listen to me saying I can't tolerate that. So lockdown was brilliant, because I was like, right, I'll do an incremental taper, and I was literally getting the razor blades out and shaving tiny amounts off the pill, and it works so much better. Because every time if I take a big step down, it all comes back. Whereas if I go slowly, it's a much smoother curve, and I just get, sort of depressed and a bit sort of grumpy and a bit irritable, and things ache. I don't get the rage. I'm not, my animals are my life, and I'm, you literally have this overwhelming urge to, damage them, and it's just horrific. But I basically have a low-grade thing called akathesia, which is something you get from a lot of drugs, but mainly antidepressants and antipsychotics and opioids. But it's an intense restlessness where you literally feel like your insides want to climb outside. It's extraordinary, and it is intolerable. And it comes with psychological symptoms: fear, rage, depression and dysphoria and everything as well. And so I have a sort of a mild version, and it was a lot bad. So it's like having a panic attack all the time. And I'd never had any kind of anxiety or panic attack, so it took me a while to sort of recognise what this was and develop coping mechanisms. But basically that's where, again, Curable has, saved me, because I had a structure, I had coping mechanisms, I had something to hold on to and know that I could help myself, and that I could not, if by not focusing on the symptoms too much and not engaging with them, I could manage life better. It has still been very hard, but I'm learning a hell of a lot. So
it sounds incredibly hard.
It's hard. The hardest thing was that golden things are so much better, and then suddenly not.
Step back, yeah.
And it wasn't me. It was just a couple of other people just slipping through the net and slipping through the system, and people making decisions and screwing up your life. And it's that injustice, I suppose. So, but I'm doing an awful lot of sort of patient advocacy work now on Twitter, and going with some amazing people and doing some amazing stuff. So again, it's all, I'm very determined. I don't want it to happen to anybody else, but if it have to have happened to me, at least hopefully it will serve some good, I suppose.
So if there is someone else in a similar position to where you were, what advice would you give them?
Well, don't taper too fast, definitely. The official advice is always, talk to a medical professional before you taper, and I definitely would, but I would always say do your due diligence. So, go on the internet. There are some really good, especially with antidepressants, there's some really good lay people stuff now. Inner Compass, Surviving Antidepressants. They really know their stuff, and they're starting to be used by professionals as a data set and advice. Slow, go slow. You get there faster by going slow.
What an incredible story. And how is your relationship with your horses and riding? Do you still ride?
I don't ride. Well, yeah. So I came back to Wales with my old pony Fizz, and my youngster, who I bought from a foal, Cirrus, is a Connemara pony. He was supposed to be my show pony. I'd done a lot of showing at county level with Fizz as a veteran, but with friends in Connemara showing. So that was what I wanted him to be, my mountain and moorland pony. So we were going to do lots of jumping and just do everything. Yeah, I bought a Connemara because they're real good all-rounders, and because I was working so hard, I didn't want a big horse that needed a lot of work. I wanted something I could give a couple of weeks off to, and then grab out the field, and he'd still be not stupid. And of course, that all went wrong, because then I got ill when he was 2, and then just after my first operation, he went off with a friend who broke him in. I'd started him, but she carried on, and just when he got back, and I started to ride him again, he injured himself in the field. Put a massive hole in one of his ligaments in his back leg, so he had to have 9 months in the stable after that, which I wouldn't do now, but that was it. So I actually had to stay in London for longer than I wanted to, because of him because he couldn't travel. So I brought him back here, and it was fine. So he had a year off, and he's not had touch wood, he's not had a moment's problem with it. So that was fine. But he actually has really severe sweet itch, which is an allergy to midges. So he could never be a show pony. So things never went how they were. But he's kept me sane for 20. He's 21 now. And he's kept me sane, and he's wonderful, and he's taught me a lot, and he's the reason I went into animal behaviourism, because I was so weak, and he's quite tricksy. He discovered that he didn't have to hang around with me because I couldn't control him, so I had to look at a different way of controlling him. Either I could get harsher and harsher bits and gadgets on him to stop him, but you still, to cause the pain, to stop him, you still have to have strength, and I didn't have that strength, and I don't want to cause my horse pain. So I had to look at a completely different way of working, which was to use positive reinforcement, and I got together with a local animal behaviourist in Swansea who is incredible, and she just changed our lives. It made me realise that riding isn't actually the be-all and end-all, partly because I have no facilities, I've no school, I've nowhere safe to ride, and he's not easy. And I had quite a few sort of hair-raising incidents out on the road with him. Basically lost my nerve with him, and he's 21. What's the point? He's happy playing in the field, so we'll carry on and do that. And I sit on him every now and again, but it's very much just something that happens. And since I got better, I've been with cycling, I found that the cycling is, you can go further than on a horse. You get all the benefits of being on a horse with being in nature and everything. Yes, there's not the in-out, but I'm quite enjoying just being me and just having me to worry about. I've been very much using the cycling as me time. It's a reframe. I reframe pretty much everything, so did that. So he's great, but I lost my little Shetland pony quite recently, which was pretty tough. Just in the start of lockdown, it was a bit of he was ill for about 18 months, sort of on and off, and we had a great summer with him because he had bad feet, and I did walking with him, so we started from just doing 100 metres even, and worked him up till he was doing sort of 5 kilometres, and we were having a great time. But we couldn't find out what was wrong with him, and he just got iller and iller, and he crashed again in October, and it's quality of life. You can't keep doing it. So luckily Jenny, my trainer, came up with the goods, and I ended up with a mare and foal straight off the Gower marshes. They're completely wild. So they're keeping serious company, and I've managed to put a head collar on the foal, and she lets me touch her all over now. And so,
amazing.
So she's going off to be with her brother soon and learn to be a proper pony, because she's a year old now. And the mum is staying. She's still, I can't touch her. She's still pretty wild, but she's getting more used to me.
You started talking about the cycling briefly. I know we spoke about it before as well, but when did you start cycling?
I started cycling literally at the start of lockdown. What happened is I started this amazing pilot study for people with chronic conditions called Muddy Care. It's a local woman who has a chronic condition herself who started this up, and it's an outdoor rehabilitation course, basically. She's got some amazing ideas, and I really hope they work out, but we were the pilot study, and there were sort of 6 of us. The first thing they did with us was surfing.
Amazing. What was that like?
Insane. And it was in sort of September. And it was, I mean, honestly, the first day we did it, I ran out of the sea and I just hugged her and I just said that I feel so free. It's amazing, because even though I was doing a lot better and I was still struggling with the withdrawal, but it's so hard to, you want to do these things, but getting over those hurdles of actually doing and knowing, and how would I go surfing? And it was incredible. And we did with Surfability, I think they're called, in Caswell Bay, and they're absolutely amazing, and they help disabled people surf. So we started doing that. So we did walking as well, was the next module, and then the module we started just before lockdown was cycling, but with electric bikes.
Awesome.
And it was amazing, because some of the other girls have really serious fatigue issues, and to see them running around yes, flying around on these electric bikes, totally free. It was just brilliant. And I really enjoyed it. And we only did, I think we did we only did two sessions with them. But I was really enjoyed it. And then, of course, you know, COVID happened, so we had to stop. And I was just like, but I really enjoyed that. And I literally dug out my sister's old mountain bike from the stable, and you know, it had the gears didn't work, and the brakes were binding. But I was like, no, I'm going to reframe this in a psychological reframe, not a bike reframe, and I'm going to enjoy this regardless, you know. And I just cracked on, and of course, you know, there are hills everywhere, and I was really, sort of struggling. So I just made a decision at the beginning that I'm just going to start off with 5-6 kilometres and just see how I go. And I would cycle to a feeling in my body. So whenever I got to that point, I would stop and walk. And that's what I do. And some days you go further up the hill than others. It really depends. And like I said, when your central nervous system's sort of in a bit of free fall, and your brain misinterprets a lot of data as danger, i.e. pain or, you know, nasty symptoms, and you don't like, you know, you panic when the nasty symptoms come. So to do that, it's fine, and we're very good at competing against ourselves as well. I'm very good at pushing myself, and then, you know, so I did that, and I did videos of all this, so they're on the internet, just me sort of waffling about daft stuff, but it's really, really fun. And I completely reframed it. This was bike time, it was mindful time, so no music in my ear or anything like this. This was me time on the bike, really mindful, so staying in this present moment as much as I could, and being in my body, you know, because a lot of my recovery has been about learning to love my body again, you know, despite the pain it gives me, and working around that, being back in it. And that's been a big part. I mean, you know, I did ballet classes and stuff, you know, it's just been amazing, and yoga. So yeah, so I did this, and I did lockdown. So March, April, May, June. So for those months I did really well, and I got up to 30 kilometres.
That's amazing.
And that was going out sort of every other day probably.
Wow.
I'd do it. And I'm tapering during this time as well, so there were a few points in the taper, especially when I was doing big step downs, where I was physically very vulnerable, and if I overdid it, I'd suffer. So, you know, it was very much sort of mentioned that. I had quite a big flare up in July of the facial pain, which is, you know, just to be expected. And I actually factored in flare ups and setbacks into my sort of plan, but very much setting in the neural pathway for bike time is bike time, and it's about pure enjoyment. It's so fun. I fell in a puddle up on the mountain one time. I was really wetting myself. It was just so funny. But I'm going out. You see, now if I get a headache, because as well as the TN, I get these sort of neuralgic headaches, which are just extraordinary, which now are just basically mild migraines, and I won't take any drugs for it, because I used to have to jab myself with sumatriptan to abort these headaches. So now, mostly if I start getting a headache, I jump on the bike and I ride, and usually after 5-8 kilometres, the headache's gone.
That's amazing.
I talk to people, you know, on the Curable Facebook page, who have, you know, migraines and stuff, and they just can't believe that. I mean, it's just like, no, they can't be bad. This is, no, they're not bad, but this is on the back of a 2-year process of working up to that. It's not something you can just do.
Yeah, you've not suffered with severe migraines for years and years, and just decided to go out with them.
No, not at all. It's an absolute, because you've got to train the brain in the right way not to panic. And the trouble is with pain is that its purpose is to make us fear, because that's what its purpose is. And fear and pain are very closely connected in the brain, and they exacerbate each other. So trying to control the pain, the fear, is actually the best thing you can do for pain. Take away a lot of the suffering that way. But it takes an enormous amount of courage. Some of the bravest people I know are not elite athletes. They are people with chronic conditions who get up every day and carry on regardless, and they find ways of managing. That's the real bravery in this world, if you ask me.
I'd agree, and actually one of my questions later on is going to be, what do you think bravery is? So we're going to come straight round to that. That's amazing. And so if there was anyone else that was also trying to manage sort of chronic pain but wanted to start getting into the outdoors, or if there was anyone who wanted to help someone with chronic pain try and get into the outdoors, what sort of steps could they take? What advice could you give?
Within their powers, get in touch with Muddy Care, but it would be wonderful if there were more things like that. I think it's an awesome idea. I'd start slow. I think don't overwhelm yourself. I think that's the important thing. So I'd get into I think it's getting into a mindset is the first thing. So curiosity. So even if it's just sitting in a green space and learning about, it's finding a hook, I suppose. You know, so, you know, like finding out about trees or something like that, and just sort of segueing in. And I started with walking, and I think that's a really good place to start. And finding, you know, footpaths and places like that. But I'd look around and find out what's out there, I suppose, isn't it? I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I found such joy in cycling, and that sort of surprised me. And I found joy in walking, but compared to cycling, it's a different level. And I just think you kind of have to try things, don't you, to figure out what's going to light. I almost said light your boat, but you know, light your fire, because there's a lot out there. But I'm also very aware that, you know, when I lived in London, you've got a whole different type of opportunity than around here. I'm very lucky around here because, you know, you can get in the car and drive to a mountain and be completely out of touch with everybody in very few minutes. So you can, even if you're not that mobile, you can still get to some amazing places. Whereas in a city, you're not always that easy. So I think it's about being quite creative.
And I really like the idea you said about, like, maybe even like looking at the trees, because then that's something that you can do outside in whatever sort of proportions you're capable to do and you feel like doing, but you can also then still do it inside if you're not feeling like
absolutely
being outside.
It's I mean, that's what I miss so much about not being out and not riding, is not engaging with nature and the animals and everything. Because with a horse, you know, the animals don't treat you like a person if you're on a horse as well, so you get to see more. But yeah, I hadn't quite realised how much I missed it, I think. But it's great. I mean, like with Muddy Care though, we did a beach clean and stuff like that. Just there's so much out there if you can sort of find the access to it. But if you do it on your own, but I mean, with the internet, we were just rock pooling one day, and I mean, it's just like with apps, it's just the world's your oyster now. It's just like, well, what's this? I've no idea. And, you know, 3 people have found out what it is before you can blink, because they've, you know,
Google Lens on it. Yeah,
exactly. So there's no excuse for not being curious these days.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely love that. So, how do you think your journey has shaped who you are now?
That's an interesting one, because in a lot of ways I've changed completely in the 2 years. The withdrawal has had much more of an effect on me than the pain has in a lot of ways. It literally felt like I shattered into pieces. And I was like, just pieces, like on the sea, floating. And I'm just literally me just trying to sort of pull all the pieces back together. And I feel like I'm going to be completely different to how I started. I don't want to. I call it broken, but it's not. It's broken, but sort of tangled. You know, I'm not, because I don't like the concept of people being broken, because I don't think anybody is broken. So it's like I broke within side of me, you know. So it's because a lot of the times when you have, depression or something, it's off times. You can sort of plan you know, what happened to help get you there. You know, I mean, I used to have, you know, low-level depression because I was in pain all the time. You know, there was a causative factor, basically. And with this, it was just so purely chemical and unnatural. The psychologist I didn't get on with, he seemed to want me to own it. And I refused to do that. I call it Cecil, the withdrawal. To sort of diffuse from it. But that doesn't mean that I'm not owning it. Because how I respond to it is mine. But I find it easy to go, well, look, this is Cecil, so, you know, it's a reason. But it certainly made me more empathetic. It's made me more wanting to hear other people's stories and made me want to help other people. And also that my experience doesn't invalidate anybody else's experience, nor does their experience invalidate mine, but we all matter. It's like, I recovered from pain. That means that a lot of people can recover from pain, but how they do it is not necessarily going to be my journey.
Yeah.
And recovery looks different to how even, you know, I thought it would be. It's interesting. I've changed a lot in the last 2 years. And I'm still changing, and I'm still learning, and I'm still growing. And that's quite exciting.
It is. I wonder where you'll be in 2 years' time.
I dread to think.
Have you got quite a supportive group of people around you?
Well, my parents are awesome. My family's great. It's still been incredibly lonely because however supportive people are, nobody, you know, they only ever see the tip of the iceberg. And in some ways this has been about actually me learning to survive with me, without anybody else. It's sort of slightly paradoxical, but I'm incredibly lucky. I have a hugely supportive family. I'm in an extremely privileged position. I mean, living in this place, being very highly supported by my family. I don't work. I have benefits, but the mildest you can claim. I was able to have an awful lot of pressure taken off me, which would have really hurt my situation more. And that's one thing I'm fighting for. I'm like, I say to people, you know, this happened to me. Well, what if somebody couldn't do the research I've done? What if they didn't have the privileges I've done? What would life be like for them? If it's bad enough for me, what would it be like for them? But yeah, a lot of it is about finding the strength within yourself, and that, I don't like to call it resiliency, because resiliency has got some strange connotations. It's more buoyancy, bouncing back.
How do you think you find that?
Self-compassion. It's pretty much the root of everything, self-compassion. Which is not going, oh, I'm going to curl up on the sofa and eat, you know, chocolate cake. I mean, sometimes it might be, but it's actually about, doing what's best for yourself, and, you know, watching the whole negative self-talk and stuff. It's it's really confronting self-compassion for a lot of people. We had this, I did this great course, with one good thing the NHS has done, it was a group course called Compassionate Resilience. But it was very compassion-focused sort of therapy, but they did this thing where, because self-compassion is, focusing that compassion on yourself is so confronting and makes you feel very vulnerable, you sort of imagine a perfect nurturer, it's called, but it's, you know, it's not an actual person, because it's somebody who's not got any, you know, it's not a real person, so they've got no failings, this person, and it's pure unconditional love from you. I mean, I like spirit guides and stuff, so that to me is just another spirit guide, you know. But it's imagining this person who's just there in life just to love you. And it's a segue between being able to do it for yourself, basically. And that's great. And you do that during meditation, and it just becomes something that's there. And it just shifts your thinking, it reminds you, and it's small things like, you know, when you drop something and you go, oh, you should be cow. Why did you do that? Well, no, don't talk to yourself like that. You wouldn't say that to somebody else. Don't worry, it's fine, mistakes happen. And when you shift your thinking and you're speaking to yourself like that, it doesn't make a big difference.
You start to form habits, I guess, as well. If you're in the habit of doing it, it's hard to break it, and then when you start to make a new one...
All these neural pathways are really important. And again, with the bike, I found out, because I did this 30-mile cycle with this really, really high things and that, and I was in quite bad withdrawal, and I overdid it, and I was knackered, and I was coming home, and it was like... And I was really worried that I'd broken the joy, that I'd ruined things because I'd overdone it and I felt horrible. And I got back on that bike and straight away it was just like zoom, straight back into that habit of gratitude. Because I always go, I'm so grateful that my body lets me do this now, that my brain lets me do it. It's just being free and out on that bike, and it is just so solid now, and I'm so grateful for that. The gratitude, that's another one. That's how I get up hills these days. I do gratitude body scans. So, big hill, right. I'm grateful for my toes, I'm grateful for my heels, I'm grateful for my ankles. And I literally go up through the body as I'm going up the hill. It gets you up a third more hill than if you don't do it.
That's so good. You've just reminded me about when myself and my girlfriend started cycling in lockdown, and she wasn't very good on the hills, and I've done a lot of trail running, so I've got a lot of mental things, yes. And I know all my games that I play to get to the top, because once you're at the top, you're there. So I had all of these and she didn't really, and there was one day we were cycling back from a big ride and I think we'd overdone it, and I was like, we should just start shouting what we're grateful for. Yeah. And so I'd shout it and then she'd have to shout it back louder, and it'd be all silly things like grateful for legs, yes, grateful for bikes, yeah, grateful for women's rights.
Yes, exactly. You see, because gratitude is another habit. It's something you can learn. And doing a gratitude practice is such an amazing thing. Even if it's just I'm grateful that I can breathe today, there's always something. Yes, it's brilliant. Oh, it's good when you've got somebody to bounce it off, isn't it? So.
Yeah, definitely. What is one thing that you know about yourself now that you wish you'd known earlier?
I think it's that time. I think it's about time. I think it's that time is less of a problem than you think it will be. It goes faster and you end up moving, you move faster than you think you do as well. I think that's it, because it's very easy, isn't it, to get stuck in the moment. Although I'm very into present moment stuff, but it's very easy to get into, my leg hurts today, this is awful, and it's going to last forever, and things always change. Things always move. And things always get better. And then they get worse again. And then they get better again.
But it doesn't last forever, either way.
Nothing does.
I've got a section that's kind of a little bit around emotions, and I'm really intrigued to hear your answers for it. And then I've got one that's kind of around women, and then we finish off with a couple of questions for advice for other people. And then that's us.
Okay.
So there's some bigger questions and then some more chilled out questions coming afterwards. I've been asking everybody about their authentic selves, and what do you think authentic self means?
Oh, that's fascinating, because a lot of my problem in the last 2 years is I felt I lost my authentic self. I'm literally rebuilding my authentic self. So my answer is I'm still finding out. Which is interesting at my age. But I do think it's very important to find out who that authentic self is and to be true to that authentic self. And to like that authentic self. I think that's very important. And to not care if other people don't like that authentic self.
Sometimes the harder one.
Very hard, because a lot of us are people pleasers, and we desperately want to be liked, and it's hard. I find it, I'm a bit I always feel a little bit, but I like me, why don't you like me? What did I do wrong? And it's like, it's not usually about you at all, but one of the biggest symptoms of withdrawal, and I still struggle with it, that sudden, like, feeling of aloneness and not being likeable. It throws you straight back to that, 8-year-old child who was bullied at school, for no reason. So it's hard. So it's been hard. It's been quite sort of a vulnerable time, but I'm lucky. I've got some magnificent friends who are very good at being nice to me. So.
And this is coming back to something you said earlier, but what do you think bravery is?
Yeah, like I said, I think bravery is the quiet stuff that people don't celebrate enough. It's the bravery of carrying on it's the little sort of trigger stacking suffering. I think that's the thing, especially people with sort of chronic conditions, and I don't think people get anywhere near enough support in the world, which is a travesty, especially women.
Would you describe yourself as brave? Yeah! For the people listening, it's a tattoo that says brave.
There's a dactyl die underneath as well. And then the next one is take little steps.
Oh, and they're both so colourful as well. They're beautiful.
Well, these are all my soxes with my little, you can move mountains and little positive little affirmations
so
on.
Cool.
Yeah. Affirmations are meaning for me. That was impossible with the in crossed out.
Yeah.
And that one's stay strong. That one's
These are
conquer
awesome.
the fear.
Where did you get these from?
Socks. And shatter the darkness. And these ones are progress, not perfection, and tiny victories. So yeah, so you can find them online.
They're amazing.
And these ones are new, but these ones are pretty ancient now. And
they're so cool. I know so many people that I would like to buy them
there's
for.
so many awesome things, and they donate to a water charity or something as well. So
amazing! I'm gonna have to before I leave make a note of what they are on my phone, and then I'll also when I do finally come to edit this, I can put a link to it and plug back to them.
Yeah, no, I love them because they're my tattoos have always been basically an affirmation, a reminder, and I'm not allowed to have them on my torso because I've got me.
Wow.
I have a brain stimulator.
Wow.
One of the
what
operations.
Is that?
It's literally electrodes on the surface of my brain over the motor cortex, and then the wire goes down to the battery pack in my abdomen. And it interferes have you heard of deep brain stimulation? Like people with Parkinson's have it, so they tremor, and then in that case the electrodes actually go into the brain. This is actually just on the top. They don't know how it works, but it's supposedly so. When you bang your knee and you give it a rub, they think it might be something like that. It interferes with the pain signals. I had that done in 2009. It only ever gave me sort of 30% sort of pain relief, but it's still on, just trundling away, and I will at some point will taper it off and see how I get on without it. But yeah, I'm not allowed to have any tattoos on my torso because of the stim, and it's like when I go to the dentist, if I have any work that involves blood, basically, I have to have IV antibiotics beforehand, just to make sure that there's no chance of infection. So if I, cut my scalp or anything, it could be, because if an infection got into the stim, it would be not good news. But otherwise than that, it doesn't bother me. It's just annoying. Like when we were surfing, it was just we just had to think about it as adaptation. So they gave me a inflatable sort of vest to wear, which it didn't actually cover where the stim battery is, but it covered enough so I could protect it. And just when I got on the board, I'd have to get on from one side rather than the other side. And I learnt that when the waves came, I had to turn so my left side was facing the wave rather than my right side, because it was rather painful when it hit the stim box. But, and yoga, I have to wear giant, the pants that keep your stomach in. If I wear those giant pants, that's much better. Otherwise, the box kind of flaps around. Because I've lost way too much weight, you see, as well, and so there's no sort of fat helping to sort of keep it a bit steadier at the moment. So.
The things like the ways you adapt.
You have to, don't you? That's what adapting or die is. It's not about dying at all. It's about not dying, isn't it? It's about adapting and carrying on. What was the question?
The question was about bravery. So I was going to go on and say, so I asked you if you thought, if you would describe yourself as brave, but I wonder if you could tell us a time when you've been brave or when you've
the one thing I want to say is that I used to put an awful lot of store by being brave. It became a very large part of my identity. Often when you're in pain becomes part of your identity, and for some people it's the pain itself. For me, it was how brave I was coping with the pain, and it became a really important, almost toxic part of my society. So that was why I had that tattoo, but and because it's a throwback into my past. But it's come to mean something different now. Bravery is something quieter to me now. It's something steadier. It's something more boring. More day to day. It's about the courage that you need to let go. It's about the courage you need to not do. To know when to say no, when to pull back, and the courage that it takes to be compassionate to yourself. I'm still working on it, to be honest. I'm still working on it, and we change our opinions all the way through life, don't we, as we experience and we grow, but it definitely means something a lot different to me now than it did a few years ago, which is interesting.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Because I'm quite fascinated with like Everest and mountain climbing and stuff like that. I've never done any climbing because I was told when I was 16 I had a whiplash injury, and I was told that my muscles and my back wouldn't. I must never do contact sports and I must never climb because my muscles wouldn't cope and I'd fall off, which is all so much looks. And I really want to try climbing. I'm horrible with heights, but I really want to try climbing. And I was just working my way up to going up to the climbing centre, which is just across the mountain there, but then COVID came, so I haven't been able to, but I'm determined to try. But it fascinates me because I think it's actually probably in my mind stupidity rather than courage. It's a strange courage. I mean, I love reading Into Thin Air and Beyond, the Void one, I mean that's insane, absolutely crazy stuff, and that's courage. But to me, it's not the courage climbing the mountains. Not the courage part. The courage part was like when you've fallen down onto the ice shelf, and the perseverance is the courage, not the wanting to do it. I think that's where I am with it. I think it's the perseverance is where I think courage lies. Then.
And what do you think happiness feels like?
There's different types of happiness, isn't there? That's the thing. Happiness can be a quiet thing. It can be this. I say stroking me dog. Or it can be that, that feeling of being out on the bike and being centred in yourself and free. So, there's so many parts of it. But I think that happiness is, as much as anything, it's stopping long enough to notice that you're happy.
I love that completely. And sometimes it's so easy to get just caught up in whatever you're doing and not notice.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we have to go through the shit to notice when we're to know what happiness is. And we take things for granted, and it's good not to. It's natural to take things for granted, but it's also good to force stop every little. That's why I like doing, like a gratitude practice and stuff, because it forces you to actually stop and look, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And in two ways. Firstly, I feel like for me, when I actually sit down, I'm like, what am I grateful for that's happened today, and look back. But then also as I'm going through my day, then I'm like, this is something that I'm going to use later.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun. I mean, because I do a little sort of post-it note almost with bullet points on it. So I don't say I must do, X amount. I just sort of do just before I go to bed. And it's lovely looking back, at the end of the year.
Amazing.
And see how many little bits of paper you've got and the things. And, and some days it's a bit sad because you've had to struggle to sort of find the things, but it is definitely a habit. The more you do it, the easier it is to find things. So it's great.
And I won't keep you much longer because I realise it's now just after 5. But do you have any female role models? Who are they and why?
Yes and no. I'm not a great one for hero worship. If hero worship, that kind of thing, I'm always much more bowled over by, meeting Sprinter Sacra was my best thing. He's a racehorse, but I think some people are amazing. I do that. But I also don't like to get disappointed, so I don't like to sort of get too sort of caught up on personalities. But I think there are some people doing amazing things, and a lot of people who impress me are normal people doing normal things. I think it's normal people pushed into extraordinary positions. I loved reading Michelle Obama's book. I found that really interesting. In some ways that was a hugely disappointing time because, it was really felt like the world was at your feet and then suddenly it just kind of didn't happen. But I can't help thinking what if roles had been reversed and she'd been president, maybe things would have been a bit better. But I think we're in a lucky time. I think we've got some awesome women out there. I love watching, see what Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez gets up to. She's pretty awesome. We've got some pretty good female politicians as well, I think, fighting. I'm very disappointed to hear that Layla Moran didn't win the Lib Dem thing, because I think that would have been a lot better. But no, I think I sort of find I try to sort of appreciate people's good points wherever I find them. My family are my role models in a lot of ways. I've got some awesome sisters and female relatives, so, I think they're pretty awesome.
So my last question, or technically second to last, is what advice would you give to your younger self?
It's ironic. We were looking at slides last night from 83 and 84. So I was, 11. And younger, even. So my younger self is very sort of front and foremost. And I think the biggest thing I'd tell that little girl is that you'll have horses of your own. Because I just remember how horse mad I was and how it was just such a desperation. And I remember that little girl a lot. Every time I sniff my horse, I just bury my nose in his neck and smell him. I go straight back to that small child and say, it'll happen. Because it meant so much to me. I think it's... I don't know is the thing. That's a really hard one because do you feel any different to that young child? Because for me, I feel like that young child is still very much me. I don't feel... Time's weird, isn't it? It doesn't really... I'm constantly surprised I'm 48. Especially as with the last, sort of the last 19 years having been in sort of a form of limbo as well. It's like, but, you haven't lived yet. But it's funny, looking back at those photographs last night, that 11-year-old, 8-year-old child, and you go back into exactly those feelings and experiences. And it's strange kind of dualism because you don't have the experience that you do now, but it's real.
It is completely. There's two things. Like, firstly, even looking back at photos from 12 days ago when I started this trip, I look back and I'm like, wow, she has no idea what's coming. And then there's this other thing that I remember when I was about 18, I was at my friend's house and her mum had just been on a date for the first time. And she said to us, she was like, you look at adults and you think that they feel different. You think that their feelings aren't the same. You realise when you get older, your feelings are just as strong. Yes. You feel embarrassed, you feel excited, you feel everything. Yeah.
You've just got a few better coping strategies, hopefully. I think the advice I go is to just keep curious. Keep curious. You can't go wrong if you're curious.
I hope you enjoyed hearing about Niki's story as much as I did. Next week, I'll be talking to Zoe in her houseboat on the canal near Abergavenny. It's a great and joyful episode that we recorded whilst making pots of tea and having huge slices of cake. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with a friend who you think might resonate with Niki's story. And you can help out the community by dropping a review, rating and subscribing. It will really help other people to find the podcast. I love hearing your feedback, and I'll be posting some quotes from Niki's episode over on the Instagram channel. We usually have conversations around things that were said in the episode, and I'd love you to join in too. You can find them over at Extraordinary Ordinary Women, spelt WOMXN. Until next time, keep on being extraordinary.